Good morning and welcome to this formal meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Councillor Adam Stokes, my Vice Chairman, is also present. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcasted live by the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I'd like to welcome members of the public watching this live. I'd like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we would need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park and wait there. Can I also remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting. Also, may I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by the Vice Chairman. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live, then press again when you finish your contribution. We will now move on to the formal agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence and replacement councillors. Over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies today from Councillor M. Clark, Councillor N. Clark and Councillor J. King. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, and thank you. Item 2 is declarations of councillors' interests. Do we have any members who wish to declare any interest, please? No, so no declarations made today. Thank you. Item 3 is minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee held on the 13th of December 2022. This item is to approve and sign the minutes of the last meeting as a correct record. Previous meeting minutes can be found on pages 5 to 18 of the agenda pack. I'm going to take it that you've all read those. Could we have a proposer, please? Proposer, please. Councillor Danny. And also a seconder, please. Councillor Sneath, was you actually at the meeting? I think you was on Teams. Teams, yeah, sure. So we need another. Councillor Key at the back there, thank you. We'll now vote. All those in favour, please. Okay. Those against? And I guess there'll be an abstention or two. Any abstentions? Yeah, I don't think yours either. Okay, is that recorded, Trina? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Those minutes are agreed as a correct and accurate record. Item 4 of the agenda is announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. I have no announcements personally to make today. We have a busy agenda with one pre-decision item. Therefore, I ask that officers take their reports presented today as read and only summarise key points and what support is required by this committee. Members are also reminded of the importance of succinct questions and contributions that will allow for efficient and effective use of the time allocated for each discussion. Executive Councillor announcements. I'm looking round. Have we any? No. Oh, sorry, Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Mrs. Bradwell's unable to attend today. She sends her apologies as she's attending the 70-year service from the coastal floods.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Rowe. I take it there's none on Teams filtering through? No. Okay, thank you. Finally, are there any senior officer announcements, please?
Thank you, Chair. Nothing from us.
Okay, right, thank you. Moving on to the agenda proper, which is agenda item 5, which is the Revenue and Capital Budget Proposals 2023-2024. This is the pre-decision scrutiny item and can be found on pages 19 to 26 of the agenda pack, and invites the committee to consider a report on the budget proposals for the next financial year, 2023-2024. The report specifically looks at the budget implications for the Council's public protection and community services. These proposals are due to be considered and finalised by the Executive on the 7th of February. The views of this committee will be passed on to the Executive as part of their consideration of this item. Our actions for today are that the committee considers and comments on the report and determines whether the committee supports the proposals to the Executive, and also agrees any additional items to be passed on to the Executive in relation to this item. The report will be presented by Keith Norland, who is the Strategic Finance Lead for Police, Fire and Rescue, who is in the chamber today. So, without further ado, over to you, Keith.
Thank you, and good morning. On pages 20 to 22 of the pack, I've provided the economic background in terms of provisional local government settlement and provide some context to the council's overall financial position.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I can't quite hear. I think your microphone needs to be a
I know,
bit closer.
Since you put you on, I know Keith adjusted it round a little bit, so we might be okay now.
Is that better now?
Okay, thank you.
So just to recap on the story so far, on pages 20 to 22 of the pack, I've provided the economic background in terms of the detail to the provisional local government settlement, which provides the financial context for the council's overall financial position. Given the uncertainty in the economy and future funding levels, we're again presenting budgets for just a single year. The proposed revenue budgets for public protection and communities are presented in Table A on page 23 of the pack. The table shows the movements from the current year's budgets in terms of cost pressures and expected savings. It does exclude pay inflation, which has been budgeted at 4%, but is currently being held centrally pending agreement of any pay award, at which time it will then be distributed to service budgets. As you'll see from the table, there isn't a great deal of change proposed from the current budgets for these services. The main change is a net increase of £326,000 in the fire and rescue budget. That results from inflationary increases in fuel costs, the facilities costs for the headquarters at Netlham, and an increase in filing costs, which is further exacerbated by the withdrawal of the related Home Office grant. That grant is now expected to be phased out over a 5-year period. Those budget increases are offset to some degree by expected savings in rent following the purchase of the Warrington Training Centre site. Although we're not presenting any dramatic changes to these budgets, we are still obviously affected by current high levels of inflation, particularly those services that have outsourced service contracts, which will continue to be closely monitored during the year. Turning to capital budgets, Table B on page 25 sets out the proposed capital programme. These are not particularly capital intensive services compared to, say, highways, where you've got the major road schemes, and others, and then some rephasing of expenditure. There's no change to the capital programme proposed from that was approved last year. Just touching on timescales for the budget process, consultation meeting with local representatives from business, trade unions and other partners was held last Friday. The proposals have been publicised on Let's Talk Lincolnshire with the opportunity for public comment. The executive will make its final budget proposals on the 7th of February, at which time the comments from Scrutiny and consultation will be available to them. The budget will then be presented to be considered by full council on the 17th of February. Hopefully that summarises the main points. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, please? Councillor Key.
Yeah, just on the fuel inflation. Obviously, fuel, we all know, went really high, and now it's coming down again. So how do you work out, because that was obviously part of the fire and rescue increase, how do you know where to be with it? Because it's come down quite a lot in the last few months. Thank you.
It's like most of our budgeting, it's to a degree crystal ball gazing, in that we make an assumption and we plan on that basis. I mean, in terms of the fuel inflation that fire and rescue have suffered this year, it's £160,000 in the current year. So although it's slipped back a little bit, we don't expect it to fall back to remove the pressure.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So on page 24, it's the fourth bullet point down. It says delivering a full cost recovery model. Registration services budget includes a 3% fee increase. That was during 22-23. What is the likely impact? Because obviously inflation is still quite high. What is the percentage going to be in 23-24? Because obviously to deliver a full cost recovery model, it would need to be significantly more, I would have thought.
sorry, apologies. Some of that is due to our continued fee increases, and also our more digital online offer, and also the sort of cost recovery to the council in terms of now bookings online. So actually the costs coming into the service are less because we're diverting more online, therefore our costs in through the contact centre is less. And then also our costs in terms of people costs would be lower because again we're doing more stuff online. So that's where we're hoping to get those balances. I can't give you the exact figure, but the 3% would want to be the target, and we'd want to look to increase to make sure we pay cost for ourselves, and then the increase with the digital savings, online savings that we're doing, and having a better and more rounded offer.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. I'll try not to ramble too much. I've looked on page 20, I think it's 1.4 about the increased spending, but I was really concerned to see nothing extra for Citizens Advice Lincolnshire. Last June or end of May, beginning of June, we had a presentation to this committee, and they said that they'd had something like it was 269% increase, I think, in take-up of the services in 6 months, because as we all know, we're in a cost of living crisis. And often they're the only source of advice and support that people who have got no money can go to. And they were really struggling. I think they only answered something like 36% of their phone calls, something like that. And at the time, I asked in this chamber if we could increase the funding to them, and there wasn't a single member that supported me in that call, despite us having a significant underspend in our coffers, as it were. And I was told to come back when it came to budget time, which is what I'm doing now. And I'd like it to be noted for the record that I'm concerned that there's no increased budget for Citizens Advice Lincolnshire. Yes, I know we give them money, but they've clearly told us it's not enough money, and we're in the middle of a cost of a living crisis, and it's really, really needed. So I'd like that to be noted for the record, please. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm going to turn to Glenn.
Thank you, Chair. This isn't exactly a response, but it is an update. The Council Corporate Department transferred the responsibility for commissioning citizens' advice to my directorate late last year. The consequence of that is that we've been negotiating with the Citizens' Advice Collective across the county to look at both efficiencies, because there are 3 bodies, and we think that there are some efficiencies in there that might also allow those resources to be better used. That negotiation has gone well. But also we're looking at the possibility of, shall we say, extending the CAB role to help more in a focused way around some of my responsibilities, particularly with respect to charging reform. That was work in progress. It was delayed by the government to 2025, but that negotiation is ongoing because we still think it's got merit. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Back over to
I'd like to
Councillor Lee.
come back on that, yeah. With the greatest of respect, when I hear increased efficiencies, that generally means more cuts. And when you're spreading responsibilities but not increasing any funding, actually that seems to me you'll put them under more rather than less pressure. So all I would do in this instance, it will come up further along the line, but I would like it to be noted for the record that there is no increased funding for Citizens Advice, given that they have told us that they're clearly struggling and they haven't got enough funding. Thank you.
Okay, that will clearly be recorded. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just going on from Councillor Lee, I think we have to remember that also districts do fund the Citizens Advice Bureaus in their own area if there's a perceived need for a certain type of advice. So I can say in East Lindsey District Council, we give a considerable amount of money to the East Lindsey Advice Service because, of course, we want to prevent things like homelessness, rough sleeping, that kind of stuff. So we give specific pots of money to them to help with specific areas of advice. So, I mean, I just wanted to put on record that the districts are also doing an awful lot with regard to the funding that is given to the Citizens Advice Service in the county.
Thank you, Councillor Gray. Councillor Key.
Yeah, on the same subject, really, because obviously I really want to support the Citizens Advice Bureau. I'm not sure of the process, so it's a question, really. Do they come to us and ask us for an amount of money, or do we offer them an amount of money? Because if it relies on them asking us, my next question then would be, have they asked us specifically for an increased amount of money and how much? Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go back to you then, Glenn.
Chair, would it help if we brought a paper with an update for members of this committee at some future date that would outline not just where we are with the negotiations with CAB, but also what the procurement process and the commissioning arrangements are?
I think that's a good point, and I think that's the way forward. So
And
thank you
if
for
I
that.
could just add, I mean, I don't want to make it a political thing because I think we all want to support the CAB.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really good idea, and perhaps sooner rather than later, if they are under pressure, and then we can sort it. Thank
Sure.
you.
Yeah, without going to a vote on that, I'm sure all members would agree with those sentiments. So yeah, thank you for that, Glenn. Yeah. Can't see anyone else wishing to speak. Oh, sorry, Councillor Sneath.
Thank you.
Could you put your mic on, please? You probably have.
I'm on now.
Yep.
Good. The Rural Service Delivery Grant, funding is maintained at 22-23 levels. Is that something that's adequate? I'd like to know a bit more about what it specifically does, where that money goes. But saying it's maintained, okay, but was it high enough already? Are we looking for more? I'm just wondering, because we're so rural, I think it's really important that we keep an eye on this sort of grant. I don't know who's that going to go to.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sure someone will be eager to answer that for us. Keith?
I'm sorry, I don't really have any further information in terms of how it fits with the service. We'd need to come back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've one or two questions here myself. At point 1.15, it's stated that there are unavoidable service-specific cost pressures that amount to £487,000, and you provide assurance that these will be balanced out by savings and efficiencies. Can you explain what it entails, please?
Yes, they're not balanced out by savings. They're offset to some degree. I mean, the 487, the bulk of that is in the ones that I've described in fire and rescue,
Yeah.
which are around the fuel costs, the costs of facilities, and the headquarters cost. In terms of offset of savings, that's principally from the rent savings from the acquisition of the Waddington Training Centre site.
Okay, whilst you're on fire and rescue, Keith, in Table B it mentions the programme 2023 is 1.913 million, increase this time to 2.691 million. And clearly it's the rolling programme for replacement of fire and rescue fleet vehicles and associated equipment. Can you just drill down a little bit, or perhaps the Deputy Chief could perhaps help us out there? Just drill down into those facts and figures a little bit more for us, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so that capital programme covers all of our fleet and equipment. So it will cover vehicles such as fire engines and our specialist appliances. It also covers our specialist equipment. So we've got a boat. I think that might cause a bit more of an echo.
I think your microphone should be switched off. Thank you.
That's better. So there, that covers all of our specialist equipment. So at the minute, for example, we've got a boats replacement programme. So we've looked at the life expectancy of a lot of our operational equipment. Some of it suffers wear and tear damage, others it's obsolescence due to technology, etc., or indeed the requirement to reduce risk. So there is a broad range of equipment covered in there, everything from thermal imaging cameras, hydraulic cutting equipment, the big capital spends like fire engines is all covered within that. So we have recently done an exercise which has looked at extending the life of some of that operational equipment and checking the robustness of the planning assumptions that we use on that vehicle and equipment programme to make sure that we're not needlessly replacing equipment that actually has extended life left within it. So that's one of the things we've done in the last 12 months to rephase some of that capital programme.
Okay, thank you. Similarly, at point 1.18, second bullet, there's mention about the withdrawal of the Firelink grant. That, as we know, will result in fire services to incur the costs which the grant would normally cover. Can either Keith or yourself, Ryan, remind members what the grant covered?
Yeah, that's the grant to fund the implementation of Firelink, which is the communication system for mobilising. It's around 305,000 at the moment, and is being phased out over a 5-year period. So we've seen a £61,000 per annum reduction in that grant, but it's specifically for that comms system.
Okay, thank you. Just one more here. We see at 1.22 that no new projects have been added to the capital programme. Can we have assurance that we're not disregarding needs of our services or delaying any projects previously considered due to increased cost, inflation and lack of resources, please?
Yeah, although no new projects have been added to the capital programme, there is a new developments capital contingency within the programme, so that funds any projects that come forward during the year, and that's set at £5 million per annum. So over the life of the 10-year capital programme, there is £50 million worth of capital available for other projects other than those that are already within the capital programme.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Anyone your way? No? Okay. Well, thank you for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of this item, and thank you also to the Strategic Finance Lead and other officers who's contributed to that agenda item. I'm going to propose that, based on today's discussion and assurances received by officers, that the committee receives and supports the report and its recommendations to the Executive, and ask that their comments and suggestions are passed on to the Executive for their consideration when they meet on the 7th of February. Do I have a proposer, please, for that? So, Councillor Key, and seconded by Councillor Stokes. All those in favour, please. Okay. Those against? Councillor...
Chair, can I have it just noted for the record, I'm against in terms of the fact that there's no extra funding for CA, Citizens Advice Lincolnshire, in the report. Thank you.
I think we've got that recorded anyway, but
Yeah.
you doubly make sure of that. Okay, any abstentions, please? Okay, thank you. That is agreed. Now move on to agenda item 6. It's His Majesty's Inspector of the Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services update for Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue. The item can be found on pages 27 to 38 of the agenda pack and provides this committee with an update on the response to the inspection outcomes from His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services in December 2021. It is reminded, should that be 2021 or 2022? 2021, yeah. It is reminded that an action plan was developed to address the 17 areas for improvement that were identified and 2 dedicated action plans to respond to the cause of concerns. The report highlights progress of the action plans. Our actions for today are: the committee is invited to consider and comment on the contents of this report. Chief Fire Officer in here, so I take it that you're going to present the report then,
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pepper.
Assistant Chief, Deputy Chief, isn't it?
Assistant Chief.
Assistant Chief, okay.
I don't mind taking the promotion, though.
Ryan, anyway, yeah. Okay, over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much. Yes, it seems like it is a little bit more proximate than 2021. That's caused because although the inspectorate came into us in March 2021, it was a 6-week virtual inspection because, of course, COVID was still very much with us. So they, an extended period of time, ordinarily they'd have only been with us for 2 weeks. They were actually with us for 7 or 8 weeks doing it virtually. Which meant that although they presented a hot debrief to us in May, the report wasn't published until December 2021. So, of course, it wouldn't have been seen by the members of this committee until very early 2022, which is why, of course, it doesn't feel like 5 minutes ago since we were last talking about this. So I'm going to present the report on behalf of Mark. On page 28, you'll see a table that shows the grades across the whole of the inspection. Specifically, I'm going to talk about the 2 areas of concern that the inspectorate raised. One was around our regulatory fire inspections, and the other was ensuring fairness and promoting diversity. So first of all, our regulatory fire inspections, the specific concern was that they were concerned that we didn't have sufficient resources to conduct our inspection programme, and that specifically we weren't following our own process regards the quality assurance of some of those inspections. During 2021, we had some very prescriptive guidance around the way we would quality assure some of those inspections. In effect, we suggested in our guidance that every inspector would have their work audited and quality assured every single month, so every inspector every month. At the time, we had a number of inspectors that were very new in post, and therefore we'd adjusted our inspection or quality assurance schedule to focus more specifically on those individuals who had least experience. So the inspectors who had a lot of experience were being quality assured less frequently in favour of those individuals who had less experience. So in effect, we were checking the work of the least experienced people more often. In any case, at any point where we were conducting enforcement actions, so we were serving prohibitions or enforcement notices, we were always quality assuring the work of those inspections as well. So we did feel like we had a belt and braces approach. The criticism was that we weren't following our own published policy around the quality assurance of work. Since 2021, we did complete the inspection programme despite the concerns of the inspectorate. We have more highly trained inspectors qualified and a clearly defined development pathway for those individuals. And we have now changed our quality assurance guidelines to ensure that we are risk assessing that quality assurance. So anyone who's worked anywhere near education will recognise a sampling plan where you sample the work of people who are new into post, etc. So that's what we've moved towards. In terms of ensuring fairness and promoting diversity, specifically one of the concerns was that we weren't training our staff in EDI, which is Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. We engaged with our own staff following that inspection to gauge their understanding and awareness of EDI. We then developed a face-to-face training package, of which the first phase we have delivered to all of our staff during 2022. Phase 2 of that training, which is more specific around some of the more specialist areas of EDI, will be rolled out on a needs basis in 2023. We're making much better use of our EDI steering group, which promotes the use of staff networks, so we get a much more balanced view of the views of our staff and the community. We make much wider use of equality impact assessments. You will see on pages 35 to 38 in Appendix A of the report the outcome letter for the HMI's recent revisit, where in effect they have signed off those causes of concern as they are comfortable that we've made sufficient progress in those areas. And we look forward to welcoming the HMI back into the organisation for their scheduled inspection between March and May 2023. I'm happy to take any questions on that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Morn, which is the support councillor for Councillor Corey, has indicated on Teams he wishes to speak. So if you can hear us, Councillor Morn, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you see and hear me as well?
We can.
I will
Loud and
presume
clear.
so. Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, just want to support what Ryan said there, and I think what the paper demonstrates is the good work that's been done, particularly in that protection area, to make sure that fire and rescue are doing the inspections that we expect them to. And as you can see from that revisit last year, that those causes of concern have been lifted, which is really positive news. And as Ryan alluded to as well, we're very much looking forward to a revisit from HMI in the next few months to demonstrate further good work and further improvements in the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue.
Okay, thank you. We've also got Councillor Corey, I believe, wishing to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'm in a low signal area, so I'm not sure. I keep being dropped out of the meeting, so I was going to say what Councillor Morn said, so I won't repeat it, but just to extend my thanks to Ryan for his report and for the whole service in how they've all pulled together and focused on this, and we are now really prepared and looking forward to the next HMI visit later on this year. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you both for that. Councillor Key.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question on both of the areas of concern. First of all, on the EDI issues, on the page 29, it says you've created dedicated email address and contact points to allow staff to feedback. It's a really simple question, really. Has anybody used the email address?
Yes, in a nutshell, yeah. So we actually have two email addresses. One provides an internal route, so for staff who are prepared to raise concerns directly to the senior leadership team, that comes straight to us, and we've addressed some concerns, procedural and more personal. We also have an address which goes through to human resources within LCC, which provides staff with a more anonymous, if not confidential, way of going through that process. We need to be really clear that anonymous concerns are difficult for us to follow up, but we can ensure a degree of confidentiality and impartiality when it goes what we would consider outside of our organisation, LFR, into LCC.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the reason for my question is that do staff feel confident that these things can be dealt with confidentially without having any effect on their career or their, you know, their relationship with colleagues?
Yeah, and that's a conversation we continue to have with staff. I think there has historically been a nervousness within an organisation. When you've got a uniform discipline organisation, there is an inbuilt cynicism that as you go through the ranks, you lose touch with people on the front line, and it's something we're working really hard through our behaviours to change. I think the proof is in the pudding. We are absolutely committed to listening to people and responding to their concerns and challenges. And we've spent a lot of time as a senior leadership team on the front line across all of our departments, so our uniform departments and our non-uniform departments and some of our support functions, to get to grips with some of the day-to-day challenges that they've got, and to try to build a genuine relationship with them so that they recognise that we are absolutely committed to improving the organisation for the better. Yeah,
thank you. We've had lots of reassurances on that, and it's something this committee, I'm sure, is keen to keep an eye on. Shall I ask the other question, Mr. Chairman? That's on the protection side. Your inspections, do you do unannounced inspections or are they announced?
We do a mixture of both. So we do predominantly announced inspections. The main reason for that is we want to reduce the burden on businesses. So we will always seek to make an appointment, speak to an accountable person. But we also we do some unannounced visits. I mean, essentially what we're trying to do is seek that people comply with the fire safety order. So we can make appointments very, very quickly, and if that encourages people to get their house in order without us needing to visit, then we've achieved what we need to do. And we can do that quite cheaply through our admin assistants making phone calls 7 days a week. So we do both. We will do during performance inspections of premises as well. So it depends on, it's a scalable approach depending on the type of business that it is.
Yeah, thank you. The only reason I ask is I used to run a food factory, so I used to know we had probably unannounced inspections at the time, and they were very effective. But I take your point about announced inspections having the same probably effect without so much work from yourselves. So that's that's fine. I understand that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For the record, I acknowledge the efforts that are reflected in the report and appendix. I'd also like to echo satisfaction that the concern around protection was discharged, and that the actions undertaken to mitigate other issues are viewed as positive improvements. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a very, very interesting paper. This business of EDI, I think one has to be very, very careful here because, of course, the ideal is always that you give equality of access. But equality is a different thing altogether. And I think one has to be very careful to take account of the different cultural and social mores of different communities and different ethnic groups. It's really quite a subtle and difficult thing to bring about, equality, although one should be aware of it. One thing I have found extremely helpful, which surprised me, I was here a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, and I wandered into a session for officers that was going on. Why don't you? It was going on. Let's wander in and have a look, as you do. And it was a session on unconscious bias. And it was staggeringly interesting to find out where my little unknown biases were. It really brought me up short. And when it came to equality, I had my own considerations of equality. I have found that very helpful. So that one meeting sent me on to look into it a little bit more. There are a couple of things here that I was very curious about. On page 28, you've got that little box with the blue writing, and it says promoting the right values and culture. So who exactly decides what is the right culture and what do they mean by that? It's just an interesting thing, you know, it's like right thinking. So it's an interesting assumption.
Yeah, you're right. So the inspection team come in. They will group 3 or 4 sub-diagnostic categories which all contribute to promoting the right values and culture. So in part that's the visibility of the senior leadership team, the fact that the senior leadership team uphold the organisation's values and culture, the fact that there is good visibility of what our values and culture actually means to staff. So they will ask questions such as, do you know what the values of the organisation are, and then can you give an example of how what that looks like in your role? So they will expect to have an example of how. So you know, we expect that our staff discharge their duty to the public, and they do it in a fair and consistent way, that they understand what risk looks like in our community, and we would expect them to be able to provide a live example, and they have hundreds and hundreds of live examples of how they do that in their day-to-day role.
Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do salute your hard work, actually, because I seen yesterday was 5 engines, I think, in Boston River Road, and that was a hard job. But thank you very much, guys, for keeping us safe. I have 2 questions, and then I have a remark. My first question, how is your position on staffing?
Do you mean our establishment? So whether we've got enough people to carry and say the role? We would broadly break that down into probably 3 areas. So we have our support functions, so the non-operational side of the organisation. We're currently undertaking a review into whether we have the right resources to move into the future. So looking at some of the challenges we face forward into the future, a reasonable example of that might be the increased use of online media for training, etc. Whether we have the right resources to develop online training material, etc. within our organisation, or video editing. So we would look back into LCC, Media and Comms Department, see what specialist skills they've got, and indeed what skills we have to supplement that in the organisation, to decide whether or not we want to build that capacity internally through training courses and exposure, or whether we want to recruit someone into a post. So that piece of work is going on at the minute, and that will inform our workforce plan moving forward 2024 onwards. So we're a little way away from implementing that. The other part of our organisation is our full-time operational staff and our on-call operational staff. From a full-time operational staff perspective, we actually have, we are currently 2 people over establishment, so we know how many people we need. We know what the retirement profile looks like for the next 12, 18 months and beyond. Clearly, when you go beyond 18 months, that you're making a number of assumptions in different areas. So we're currently 2 people over establishment. We expect retirements in the next few weeks, months, which will drop us back down to establishment. We have a whole-time recruits course which starts in a matter of weeks, middle of February, which will bring us back over establishment to account for further retirements over the next 12 months. Our on-call staff, we're always recruiting. We have a very changing society, and the draw that we require for our on-call staff is significant, and Councillor Pepper will be very aware of this. So we require of them an extended commitment, so they need to be within 5 minutes of the fire station to be able to respond, to be operationally useful to us. With a change in society, we find that places huge burdens on people, and of course we're competing in a voluntary market. We have a strong tradition in Lincolnshire of voluntary work, but if you're in the market to undertake voluntary work, the Fire and Rescue Service is quite some commitment. It's an exciting, rewarding commitment, but it's quite some commitment. So we do struggle with some retention there, and our model, we tend to keep people on average for 3 or 4 years before they then seek something else to do, or their commitments change, personal commitments. It's a very long answer, but hopefully providing you with enough information. We do recruit to the stations that we require to be available more often than we recruit to the stations we don't need to be. So we've got 16 on-call fire stations which we need to be operational 24 hours a day. So we would prioritise recruitment activities to those areas, and the others we then recruit as and when we need to.
Yes, please do.
Thank you. My second question is very, I think, simple, but if you have the information, that would be nice. Have you had any recorded complaints regarding unfairness and inequality in your work, if you are aware of anything?
It depends at what level. I think we're always getting complaints that we're not doing things that are fair, and I think that's the nature of running a big organisation. We investigate those thoroughly. I'm aware specifically of one where an individual has appealed because they felt the decision wasn't fair. At appeal, the outcome was that the appeal wasn't upheld. There's then a mechanism to go through to Lincolnshire County Council. It's gone through, it's been independently looked at, and again it's been found that we've acted in fairness. So no, I think is the answer to your question, although I can always stand to be corrected.
Chairman, thank you.
Could I just remind you, Councillor Danny, that both of those questions so far are not related to the agenda. We are here to scrutinise the agenda today, and we did go off on a tangent a little bit, so hopefully the next one's going to correct the record.
I can guarantee the next one is...
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to do that. My next one is more like a remark, I said, and it's if you come to, I think, page 28, when you have promoting the right values and cultures, which is, it's good, and then ensuring fairness and promoting diversity requires improvement. So I don't say if we can promote something and we are good at promoting it, and then when we came like to fairness and promoting diversity, it requires, improvement. So it's a bit of like a gap down there. If we promote something, I think it should come with the positive results. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So, yeah, as in my previous answer to another question, the inspector are looking at a number of criteria that are very distinct between them. There is clearly a big overlap between those areas. So what the inspector are saying in this case is that we didn't have some of the systematic things in place. So staff across the organisation hadn't received a consistent level of EDI training. What they didn't say was that staff are behaving unfairly or in a way that was outside of our values. So promoting the right values and culture is saying, do staff behave in a certain way? Whereas ensuring fairness and promoting diversity, that we got picked up on some of the procedural issues. What they weren't saying is that we had a culture which was discriminatory or anything like that.
Okay, Councillor Key.
Yeah, and just one last point really on this cause for concern, ensuring fairness and promoting diversity. What would you say we do differently in Lincolnshire to some of the areas that have been covered on the news that have had these horrific stories about, well, we don't need to go into what the details were, we know what they are. What do we do differently here to make sure it doesn't happen in our county?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, so we've one of the things we've done immediately after the publication of particularly the London Fire Brigade independent report into culture was go and speak to staff. Yeah, I think it's something that clearly we don't recognise some of the extremes of behaviour that were reported, some of the abhorrent behaviour that was reported in some other fire and rescue services. It's not something that we recognise here. However, I think we would be naive to think that there isn't the potential of there being people in the organisation who don't feel like they're treated as an individual. So we've been out to staff to make sure that staff across the organisation are very clear about what our stance is on some of those behaviours, and also to engage with staff and provide staff at all levels with an opportunity to speak directly with the senior leadership team to make sure that we absolutely are displaying those values and behaviours. We are lucky that in some respects we're a small organisation, so we are known within the organisation, for better or worse sometimes, but we are known within the organisation, and that makes it a lot quicker. We're a lot more agile in terms of some of that behavioural change, because I can go and visit every fire station in the county within a reasonable space of time. That's a very difficult thing to do in a metropolitan organisation. So of course they're relying on the transfer of those behaviours, and they're relying on middle managers behaving in a way that the senior leadership team perhaps would want them to behave. So that change takes a lot longer, whereas we can physically go out onto fire stations and into support departments alongside those middle managers and support them to engage in cultural change.
Thank you. I mean, your reassurance and that I had from the Chief Officer last time, I think is really important. And we appreciate it, and we don't want that behaviour in Lincolnshire, and we don't want it and you don't want it. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, very similar question I had to that, Ron. We've all heard about these misgivings in not only the Met Police and also London Fire Brigade, and some of those are EDI issues, as you're aware. And it's fair to say it does cast a shadow over other emergency services too, and I just wanted to be assured there are no such issues currently in Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue.
Yeah, certainly I can provide the assurance that there is nothing ongoing that we're aware of to those extremes. We will take all and every opportunity to enforce those behaviours, and we do it from a perspective of positive reinforcement. You know, we live and breathe those values and behaviours. We ensure that our middle management team do, and our leadership team throughout the organisation. And when we find instances of behaviour that doesn't meet those standards, then we either educate if it's on the margins of good behaviour, or indeed take disciplinary action if it's more cut and dry.
Okay, thank you. On page 29, under actions to improve how Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue works with its staff and provides feedback in relation to EDI issues, you mentioned that a staff survey has been launched. It would be interesting to see what feedback is collated from this survey and what key messages emerged. Are you able to share some of that with us today?
I think it would probably feature better as a separate report if that's okay, Councillor. So we did it in two ways. The HMI themselves do a staff survey every time they come and inspect with us. LCC had a cultural survey 12 months ago, and we used that to educate some of our understanding about the organisation. But I could certainly bring some of that back in a separate report if that would be useful.
I could. If you could please, Ron, that would be appreciated. Thank you. On page 30, you mentioned that you provide training qualifications to all staff at the appropriate level with a required continuous development plan. Do you know what percentage of the staff that qualify for CPD training are currently enrolled to obtain further qualifications, please?
Yeah, so this specifically refers to our protection team. So we have 15 fire safety regulatory auditors who go and inspect buildings and have an enhanced level of training. So they will be trained to a level 4 diploma level. At the minute, we have 12 of those individuals who are qualified and competent up to level 4 diploma. There's a level 4 certificate which sits below that. The rest of the team are either qualified at level 4 certificate or in the process of becoming level 4 certificate qualified. They will move it up to level 4 diploma in the next 6 months. We've also got a programme which is unusual for fire and rescue services to upskill our watch-based leaders to the level 3 certificate, which gives them a grounding in fire safety enforcement, which provides a development pathway through into a protection role, which means when they do move into a protection role within the organisation, there isn't the same jump in terms of the skills required, but it also provides us a greater ability to do some of that eyes and ears on the ground. And Councillor Key talked about some of those no-notice inspections. It does mean that when we are either out at fires or out and about doing other work within the community, we have another set of eyes and ears on the ground that are able to feed into our regulatory team any concerns that they may have.
Thank you. And finally from me on page 33, changes in judgment levels. It states we are currently on a requires improvement across many of the categories of judgments of the inspection. Can you provide assurance that at the next inspection in May, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue will be in a stronger position to achieve at least an adequate level, if not to exceed this, and also to maintain our good judgment across the 4 areas that have already achieved it? I think you touched upon that, Ryan, but if you could just clarify it for us, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So as you allude, the inspection categories have changed. So when we were inspected last time, there was outstanding, good, requires improvement, and then inadequate. The HMI have changed the policing judgments now to have a middle ground, so there is outstanding, good, satisfactory requires improvement, and then inadequate. The concern certainly when the consultation was raised on this was that there would be a race towards adequate, and it wouldn't provide the definition between good and requiring improvement. That isn't something that they've seen in policing. They've brought it into the fire and rescue inspection methodology as well. What they have done, though, is we will no longer see a graded judgment at the pillar level. So at the minute, we are graded at efficiency, effectiveness, and people. They're going to remove that grading at those headline levels, and we will just get 11 graded judgments across those 5 categories, if you like. So we will get a grading that isn't amalgamated up and sort of judged at a pillar level. We met with the executive councillor and the assistant executive councillor a week or so ago to provide them a detailed understanding of where we feel we are against the methodology. We are confident that we will get at least satisfactory across the board, but we'll see what the inspectorate says in a few months' time.
Okay, thank you. No one else wishing to speak? Okay, thank you. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I'm going to propose that we receive the report and that the committee is satisfied with the actions implemented to address the recommendations made by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, with the progress made against these and with the assurance received on continuous improvements. I also request that our comments from today's discussion are taken under consideration by the relevant lead officers and executive portfolio holders as recorded. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Okay, that's agreed. Thank you very much. And thank you, Ryan. We'll move on then now to item 7, which is the Trading Standards, Food Standards and Enforcement 2021-2022. This item is on pages 39 to 64 of the agenda pack. The report and appendices attached provide the committee with a review of the delivery of food standards enforcement undertaken by Lincolnshire County Council Trading Standards in 2021-2022. The report also covers sources of intelligence available to the service that was previously requested by members of this committee. Our actions for today are that the committee is invited to review and comment on the contents of the report and the delivery of the food safety standards work within Trading Standards Service. The report will be presented by Mark Keel, Head of Trading Standards, who is in the chamber today. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Firstly, I'd just like to introduce my colleague, Paul Dolby. He's a Senior Trading Standards Officer and is our Lead Officer for Food Standards Enforcement. If there's any technical questions, I'll be bowing to his superior knowledge.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark, and welcome, Paul.
So I don't propose in going into too much detail on the report. I'm quite happy to take questions on that and on the sources of intelligence. But if I may, I think there was a question just before Christmas that was regarding work that we were undertaking on the run-up to Christmas in relation to scams and to shopping for consumers and the sort of messages that we're putting out to sort of increase consumer protection. So one of the areas that we are particularly interested in the run-up to Christmas is the safety of products that are being sold, particularly at the Christmas market, Christmas light switch-ons and some of the events that happen around the county. In previous years, we've had a number of seizures made of light-up toys. These predominantly are sold to children. They are powered by button batteries. One of the issues that we've found has been unsecured button batteries with easy access. So we do some work going out to look for those type of products. This year, where we were fortunate, we engaged with one of the traders who sends people to these events, and he brought a van full of products up to our Lincoln office. We were able to do some pre-market examination of those. so we could check that those button batteries were secure. We could check labelling, traceability, and the proper markings and warnings and instructions were all provided with those. As a result of that, we saw much reduced level of problems this year. Only a small handful of items were actually seized across the markets that we looked at. We visited Lincoln Christmas Market, the Lincoln Light Switch On, and an officer went down to Sleaford for their Christmas market as well, and very few problems identified there. With the Lincoln Market, we do carry out a routine inspection on the Thursday. Officers do go up and look at all aspects of what's being sold, from the food through to the product safety, making sure that items are priced, properly labelled and marked as they should be. We also have officers on call over the weekend, and if we get contact through our out of hours contact, we can send officers up to have a look if issues are raised. Nothing too much this year. We did have one complaint come through from Lincoln City Environmental Health regarding some salami that was being sold that wasn't labelled up on the stall. Officers did visit, and they were providing leaflets along with the products to people that were purchasing. We gave some advice on what they should be doing, and the follow-up, we've taken that up with trading standards in Warrington, where the trader was based. We also did a joint inspection to a nightclub with Lincolnshire Police Licensing, following complaints that they'd received. We did checks on spirits, checking for substitution, making sure that they're not being watered down. No problems identified from a trading standards perspective on that one. And we also do a lot of media work. We put a lot of messaging out through social media, through our Facebook and Twitter accounts. Some of that is content that we create. Some of it is stuff that's produced nationally that we retweet or follow up on. We've also put out press releases, and we've done media interviews for both radio and the press. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Just before I ask for any questions, Mark Keel, Head of Trading Standards. I believe you've been promoted since you were last here, is that correct?
Yes, since Sarah Barry left.
Okay, so congratulations on your appointment, Mark.
Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? Councillor Key, followed by Councillor Brockway.
Yes, thank you. Well, three things really. The first thing, the number of food inspections on page 48, 106, that doesn't seem very many to me, considering that there's so many food industries and businesses in the county. I used to be a caterer myself, so that just doesn't seem as if we've had a very good look at it. Thank you. That's the first question.
Yeah, it is one of the areas that we are aware of and we are looking at. Yeah, it was down on the previous year, that number of inspections. But there was some issue at the beginning of the year with COVID restrictions still being in place for the first 3 months, and we did some online checks there.
But my only point on that would be, sorry to interrupt, yeah, the food businesses carried on.
Yes.
So it shouldn't really have made any difference.
Well, we were asked really not to inspect those premises by the Food Standards Agency. Oh. The instruction was from them not to go into premises unless there was a need for us to go in. So obviously we were monitoring all of the complaints and inquiries that came through, and if there was a need, then we would inspect. But the routine stuff we moved to online. Did checks on labelling and things like that, did some test purchasing that way as well. But one of the problems, or one of the things that we have at the moment is a number of officers in training, which is drawing some resource out of the front line. But one of the things that we want to do is encourage those trainees to pick food and to take food as one of their options. And we are looking at expanding the inspection programme and our sampling programme as our resources allow, because that's part of the training. And once they're qualified, it's part of the ongoing continual professional development requirements. So we like to make sure there's enough work then for those qualified officers to retain their competence.
I would just say I think that is a weakness, that we've only been to 106. And I think one of the big issues is with the labelling particularly and people's allergies. We probably remember the case of the person who had the sandwich that actually they had a severe reaction and I think they passed away. So I just think that is we need to look at that because that is a weakness. That would be my point there. My second question was on the liaison between the county council and the district councils, because obviously their environmental health officers do a lot of the inspections as well. And it does say there is all this liaison, but can you just tell me a bit more about how that physically happens? How does it happen? You know, how do the two work together?
I'll hand this one over to Paul actually, because he works quite closely with them.
Hi, Councillor Key. Yes, I work with the district councils across the county, the 7 district councils. We have a food liaison group meeting once every 3 months. We discuss issues across the board. Obviously, they deal with hygiene predominantly, but we do work closely with them in respect of allergen enforcement. And they're out and about a lot more than we are, and they inform me if they come across anything in regard to an allergen non-compliance. And then that may lead to a subsequent joint inspection, of which I've done several with the local environmental health officers, and we're constantly in contact with each other, usually by email, but occasionally I'll get a phone call from an officer saying they've been to a premise and we found this. Are you interested? Would you like to come along with us the next time we go, or do a joint visit as soon as possible? So that's how it works at the moment.
Is there any value, or are you allowed to share your reports? So if they visit a premise, can you have a copy of do they send it to you automatically?
If they think they've found something relevant to trading standards that they couldn't enforce, we do overlap with allergens. They can enforce allergen enforcement. So they will pass something through if it's something that they can't deal with on the spot.
Yeah, the reason I ask that is that obviously if there's a weakness in one area, it could indicate weaknesses in other areas that they probably haven't looked at. So I just thought there might be a value in you sharing the reports so that, you know what I'm getting at?
I suppose my response to that is that it does happen. It's not formulated, but it does happen. I do get plenty of emails from district council colleagues giving me information about they've been to X premise and they found this. Perhaps you would like to visit, put that onto your inspections list because we've got concerns from a trading standards perspective.
Yeah, I was thinking more of a formalised system of that happening, so that if the premise that they inspect falls below a certain standard generally, you automatically get the report, so that then you can make your own mind up about whether you're going to go or not.
That, in an ideal world, yes.
And my third thing was about the markets. You mentioned the Christmas markets. I go to a weekly market, and I was pleased last summer that to see an inspection with the police and the county council trading standards. The following week, there was a distinct fall in the number of stalls selling dodgy stuff. But then, as the weeks went on, it crept up again. So my point here is, do you do follow-ups after a few months because everything is all right for a little while and then people get more confident that, you're not coming back? Do you know what I mean?
That will very much depend on what we find at the time. If there are a number of issues there, then it will go back in and there'll be a follow-up inspection. If there's only a few minor non-compliances, then generally speaking, we're looking for areas that are the worst offenders. So yes, if we've found problems, chances are we'll go back. If it's a minor pricing thing or something like that, perhaps not, but it will come round again as part of a routine inspection programme.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry to bombard with questions.
That's okay. Thank you. We've got Councillor Brockway, followed by Councillor Sneed.
Well, actually, Chairman, those excellent questions and answers. He's asked my question. I was going to ask about the liaison between the two authorities. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, Councillor Sneed.
Thank you. First a comment, then a question. I'm delighted to see that the primary authority partnerships are pretty much, well, 3 of them are based in South Holland. We're obviously a very foodie area, which is great. And we've got the co-ops everywhere, so yeah, great, that's where I come from, so I'm delighted to see that. My second point, well, it's a question really. On page 25, you talked, there was in the previous report, there was a mention of buying a van, trading standards van, and I'm interested in how they got about before that. But following on from that, is it liveried, or does the van just turn up to business? Because I'm just thinking it could be quite off-putting if customers saw that the trading standards were there. They might think, oh goodness, is there something wrong there? I'm just interested to know how you cope with public perception, really. Thanks.
Yes, we do have a van, and it can be liveried. We don't keep it permanently marked up, but we do have some magnetic signs that we can put on if we need them and it's the appropriate circumstance. As far as inspections go, again, we're very similar to the fire service. Some of it is pre-planned, some of it is just drop in and take them by surprise, as it were. But it depends very much on the circumstances and why we're inspecting. Large type businesses will look at making a pre-arranged appointment so that we're speaking to the right person within that. But obviously, if there are issues that are coming through on a complaint, then we'll drop in. Part of that perception is obviously how we behave and how we're seen when we're on the premise. We're quite happy to discuss things with people away from the service area if needs be. Obviously, if you're walking into somewhere like a butcher's, you do have to have a look at the counter. You might have some comments to make about the display and the labelling and things like that. But once you've had an initial look, those discussions can take place away from the shop floor. So we are conscious that it can send a message. But we're also quite happy to sort of talk to people if they come to us with any concerns. If a member of the public was asking what was going on, then we're quite happy to say it's just a routine inspection. We're just taking some samples. No problem that we're aware of at the moment, and it's all part of that discussion.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will try to keep with the subject, so I'm not derailing myself this time.
Okay.
So, I would just go to the page 40 and point 1.5, which talks about cross-contamination. Now, yesterday, while I was walking by Emery Lane, 6 o'clock in the morning, a gentleman was sitting inside his cooking area with a cigarette. So I knocked the door and I went inside to tell him that he's not allowed to smoke because health and safety, cross-contamination and all of this. He didn't speak in English, he was cooking, and I do presume he doesn't have any qualification for health and safety, basic things. So I would like to know, how do you deal with these issues? Especially in Boston, we have an influx of a lot of Bulgarians and Romanians, if I may say, travelers. So most of them, they can't probably read or write their own language, but they're opening food outlets. How do you deal with these things? Thank you.
There are a number of ways that we can deal with aspects of the food work. There is a very good video that's been produced by the Gwent authorities looking at food allergens. That's been produced in multiple languages, about 18. So we can refer people to look at that, which will give them some advice about the labelling and what they need to be doing in terms of looking after their customers who have allergen concerns. But also some of the standard advice that we would give out is available in multiple languages, and we can produce those leaflets. In terms of actual communication on site, we do have access to translation services. We can either do that over the phone, or if it was a particular issue that we wanted to clearly get across, we could arrange for an interpreter to go with the officers to undertake that inspection.
Okay.
Thank you. Wouldn't it be appropriate, probably before opening a food outlet for, the EU citizens, is to have a crash course on health and safety and on food especially?
It would certainly help. That they are required before opening a food business to register with the district council. With their environmental health, they should be registered as a food business. There is a pack, a booklet that the food business operator should work through in terms of what's required for them to run the business effectively, and it's one of the things that an environmental health officer would run through if they were to carry out an inspection. So it covers aspects of hygiene as well as some of the labelling.
Okay, thank you. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, we talked before about the high allergen and contamination of certain products, and I still see a lot of products sold on some mini markets in Boston, which is you hardly can read. They're written in Russian, Lithuanian, Polish. And if I may suggest, if we can probably propose to the shopkeepers to use stickers, which is written in English, that this contains, for example, nuts or seeds or whatever, can be, causing probably a fatal accident to someone. Thank you.
I totally agree. Yeah, the food safety aspect of the food relates to the label, and if the allergen labelling isn't in English, the language of the member state, then it's illegal to sell. We do work closely with a lot of the shops in respect of labelling and the correct labelling. Unfortunately, a lot of this product is bought from wholesalers, often London and other areas outside of ours. We make a lot of referrals to our colleagues in those areas in respect to the wholesalers. The wholesalers do provide overstickers with the language requirements of the ingredients list, etc., in English, but not always does it get stuck onto the product. And we've had this problem for the last 10, 15 years, trying to get the businesses in Lincolnshire to get the overstickers, which gives the English labelling mandatory information.
So what measures do we take to prevent it from happening? Because the sticker could be on a pack of 24 probably glass bottles or jars of some vegetables, but then when they rip it off, there is nothing on the bottles. And I think probably it should be the responsibility of the shop owners or keepers. Thank you.
Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the shop where the product is purchased. And we have worked, as I say, with some of these businesses. A lot of them are interlinked. They use the same wholesalers. And as I say, a lot of work has been done with these wholesalers in the south of the country in respect of getting them to comply. Unfortunately, we get very little. In fact, I can't remember the last time we got a customer complaint about this type of thing, because ultimately the people buying the product can actually read them. I know that doesn't make it right, but that is often the case. The people using the shops are of that nationality and therefore can read the product labelling sufficiently. It's been a problem for a long time. And it's not just in Lincolnshire, it's across the whole of the country.
Yes, there's even restaurants with their own menus, with their own language.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Key wishes to come back.
Yeah, I was just coming into
then followed by Councillor Brockway. So Councillor Key.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in on something that Councillor Danny said about the gentleman who was smoking while he was cooking, because that's obviously a basic food hygiene issue. Many years ago, I was a food hygiene trainer. And I would often have referrals from the district council for people to come on a course. I worked in a food business, but we opened the courses up to people in other businesses just to sort of get people through the course. But you don't hear much about that qualification these days, and it strikes me that this is a classic example of where basic food hygiene training, whether through an interpreter or whatever, would be a really useful thing in certain areas. And there was a big push on it when I was doing it, and I went to Birmingham for my training, and then I could train other people. But that seems to have bizzled out a bit, and maybe it's time to bring it back. Thank you.
Wish to comment, Mark?
Only that I'm not sure whether or not that can be organised through the district environmental health. It would be their area of responsibility, not necessarily for trading standards, but I'm quite happy to find out and report back.
Okay, I think it's an issue that Councillor Dunny raised, and I think most of us, or if not all of us, have seen instances of this over a period of time, so I think it does need some reassurance and looking into if we can.
Yeah, it's one of the concerns that I have in respect of this. It may be the migrant community that are using these supermarkets at this particular time, but you know, years ago when things like Chinese supermarkets and Indian wholesalers came into the country, that was similar. Now it's much more of a multicultural supply chain that they have. The customers coming in probably are more English speakers who's not going to understand those labels. So as people become more integrated and we become more adventurous with our cooking and our eating, you know, there's going to come a point where English people start to look at those particular types of outlets for ingredients and things. And we're going to have to make sure that the labelling is appropriate for when that happens.
And the smoking as well. Needs
Yes.
to be
Could I just come back, Mr. Chairman, on that? I think we need to be careful that we're not highlighting it as a particular issue for any culture, because
Sure.
my experience as
Yeah.
a trainer was that it was basically anybody. Everybody needed this basic training because you just do things without realising. I remember going into a supermarket, and this was before I did my training all those years ago, and I went to get some cheese, and the person blew into the bag to open the bag to put the cheese in. And you
Let's
know,
move on. Councillor Brockway.
People do those sort of things without thinking, and it's basics, really.
Oh, yeah. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, this again is a very, very interesting paper. And one of the things that I do feel perhaps we need to emphasise, and we could do this through the districts, is education about food hygiene. You know, we're talking an awful lot about the organisations that are selling and manufacturing the food, but I do think there is considerable responsibility on the shoulders of the purchasers as well. We need to make sure that we store it properly and that we watch for the use-by dates. I mean, you've got the best before dates, and you can use them a few days afterwards, but the use-by dates do tend to be quite tight, and it's worth making sure that people know the difference. I often wonder about this, you know, because if you take toddlers, they hoover up everything that they find anywhere, you know, and they seem to survive, and I do wonder if there's a change in our physiology when they reach the age of 4 or something, because clearly it is possible with some contaminants to get away with it. But the stuff that you're talking about here is pretty serious, and some of it is really worrying. The one that really disturbed me was 8.22, which you don't need to look at, where somebody denied that there were peanuts in a product, and in fact there were. I mean, we're talking there about killing, and they're potentially killing, and their fine was 320 actually, sorry, I've got it here. I was delighted to see that the prosecution cost was considerably more than that, but that isn't a big enough fine for something as dangerous as that. So maybe there needs to be lobbying there. What I'd be keen to see therefore, Chairman, is greater education in food hygiene about, you know, how do you deal with a chicken? How do you clean the surfaces after you've prepared it? That sort of thing, extra protections in the home tied in with what we're doing in the businesses. Maybe I'll take that back to West Lindsey and tell them what I've said here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny.
Back. Thank you. I just want to compliment on my colleague here behind me. I do have few certificates for food hygiene and manufacturing food as well. So we know the process, and I think it's time for us to make it mandatory for anybody opening a small business where it's related to food to have that basic understanding of how to deal with food and how to present the food, and how self-hygiene, I think it should be something which is normal for a person to wash their hands, to smoke somewhere else, you know. And I think it's not happening at the moment. I think we're letting it go because things become so easy. So if a person comes and opens a food outlet, and he doesn't have to go through this process. For him, it's easy, so his friend can do the same, and it will get bigger and bigger, and I think we will not be able to contain that. And I mean, we cannot forget, or if I remind my colleagues here about Lidl, I think in Bourne, it scores 1, so it has to be shut down of the hygiene. It was found out there, and that's Lidl. This is a big company, which is they provide their employees with a lot of trainings, and I do believe that they provide. And they failed. So we have to be very careful, I think, to protect our residents around Lincolnshire. We have probably to work a bit harder and make it mandatory for people. Before you open your business, I think you should go through the course. And it can also make some money for us, because these people can pay for their course. We don't have to give it to them for free. They can pay for the course, and we can provide them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mark? Comment?
Again, so as far as the hygiene element of that goes, it would be the environmental health responsibility as part of the food registration process. Certainly in terms of having a mandatory qualification, I think it's something that needs to be taken up with the Food Standards Agency for something that they to build into on a statutory basis.
Sure, thank you. Mark, in relation to 8.6 on page 49, it mentions non-compliant butchers in terms of online sales. I'd expect these are online sales that are delivered by businesses in the county, but can you just tell me what happens when deliveries arrive from out of county, and do you liaise with other trading standard services to alert or be alerted online retailers that do not comply?
Yes. It's the short answer. If we have any sort of non-compliance where the manufacturer or the supplier has originated out of county, then we would refer that back with the results of any sampling that we've done.
Okay, and one other from me on page 61, I think it is appendix.
Can I just mention that the reason there was so many non-compliances was due to the pandemic. A lot of businesses were looking for other ways to sell their products, and one of them was online. So a lot of these butchers had never done it before, and there were minor labelling issues with regard to things like the meat content for a sausage wasn't on the internet, which it needed to be on the website, should I say. So there was lots of non-compliances like that. It wasn't deliberate, it was just because they were trying to look to sell their products elsewhere and going into the online business and not realising some of the requirements were in place.
Change your circumstances, diversifying.
Exactly
whatever.
that, yeah.
Sure, yeah. Okay, one other question from me was page 61, appendix B, was intelligence. Is that a two-way thing? You talk about you get intelligence from here and there, but do you provide intelligence to other agencies?
Yeah, generally speaking, yes. Perhaps things like Crime Stoppers, which is a reporting service, we wouldn't necessarily be feeding back into them, but any of those agencies that are listed down there, yes, it's a two-way information.
It's a two-way thing, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we any further questions? We've got the executive member for trading standards here. Before we close this, was there any comments you wish to make? Sorry to put you on the spot, but we'll make use of you while we're here. Okay, thank you. I'm going to propose then that the committee receives the report and we request our feedback, comments from the debate to be taken under consideration by officers. One or two quite important issues there, I think, have been raised, Mark, if you could look into those for us. Can members please raise your hands if you agree? Okay, thank you, that's all agreed. And thank you, Paul and Mark, for your presentation. I'll now move on then to item 8, which is the resettlement schemes and asylum dispersal in Lincolnshire. This can be found on pages 65-74 of the agenda pack. The report provides the committee with an overview of the refugee schemes and asylum dispersal, the national position and the response by Lincolnshire organisations to national policy decisions. The report covers the latest available figures, operational arrangements, organisational responsibilities and funding arrangements. Our actions for today is that the committee is invited to review and comment on the contents of this report and endorse the activities undertaken to date. The report will be presented by Samantha Neal, Assistant Director of Prevention and Early Intervention, who is supported by Lauren Grosvenor, Service Manager, ICS. Now, both Samantha and Lauren are on Teams, I understand, today, so over to you. Samantha.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you for that introduction. So members on the committee will recall, I think it was November time, we brought you an update specifically around the Ukraine resettlement scheme, which is tasked directly to the County Council to coordinate. And at that meeting, it was felt helpful to have an overview of all of the different schemes. As you'll note from the report, the vast majority of these schemes are determined by national and indeed international policy. Some of them develop over a period of time, but many of the ones that are operational now developed at short notice. So you'll recall the evacuation of people from Afghanistan, prior to that the evacuation of people from Syria, and obviously most recently the invasion of Ukraine. In terms of definitions, we wanted to be really clear that there is a very clear distinction between refugees and asylum seekers in law. Those groups of people have very different rights and responsibilities, and there are different restrictions and opportunities for them while they are in the UK. It is complicated though, because many of the schemes differ in terms of what might be expected both of local organisations and of those individuals who arrive in the country. So the report starts with those legal definitions of asylum and refugee status, then looks at the refugee resettlement schemes that are active across Lincolnshire, then some of the work around asylum seekers that you will have seen, and finally ends with an update around the Ukrainian position in particular. We thought it would be useful just to include that the government has since changed some of its policy around this, and we are picking up those changes and implementing them as required. So in summary, before I open to questions, in the last 18 months in particular, there has been a huge amount of activity driven by the international situation. It's been quite a steep learning curve, I think, for all of us in Lincolnshire. But by way of assurance, we have an extremely effective and active county-wide partnership chaired by North Kesteven District Council. We are very closely linked as a group of Lincolnshire local authorities across into the East Midlands Strategic Migration Partnership, and we have a really good grasp, I think, now of what's expected of us and our partner organisations through Lauren and the small team of staff working to her within the Public Health Directorate. Don't particularly want to go into any more detail because I think there will be questions from members, and conscious there's a lot of detail in the report, but happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you, Samantha. I'll now open it up to the floor. Councillor Sneath.
Chair, have extra staff been taken on to take on this work for the County Council and in fact for any of the councils that are involved? And if so, is that funding for them, for their salaries, taken out of funding we receive from the government? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Are you able to answer that one, Samantha?
Yes, so in terms of the Homes for Ukraine scheme, that has provided us the opportunity to put staff in terms of Lauren's role and the staff working to her to meet the workload that is required of us, but also for us to be able to apply staffing to other areas of need. So I think we reported to you before around augmenting the homelessness provision in district councils, for example. So we have been able to use that funding towards that. However, in general, most of the schemes don't provide for additional staffing to be taken on, because we have been able to now offer permanent employment in terms of the role that Lauren has. She's keeping track of the Ukraine scheme, but also overseeing now much more broadly the work that we're doing. So that sits within public health, as I've said, but it will depend on the schemes. It also depends where the funding sits. Not all of the funding for the schemes, as you'll see from the report, comes to us at a county council. There are usually costs that we can claim back against some of the resettlement schemes. What I would say, though, is in terms of the asylum dispersal, there is little, if anything, in the way of funding for any of us for staffing or for any other support that might be necessary across the piece. Thank you.
Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Again, these papers are so interesting. I love this committee. You become extensively educated by the information in these papers, and I do appreciate the effort it takes to put them together. On page 69, there's a paragraph which I find a little confusing, not because of the way it's written, because I think of the way the government is apportioning some money. it talks about per capita funding being reduced, but being replaced by 150 million, which is going to be available in 23-24. At the start of 23-24, well, I don't know what they mean by that, because at the start of 23 is different from the start of 24, and that impacts on what a council can do. So I'd be keen to know, is the money accessible already? So that's my first question. But it also talks about money being allocated to help our Ukrainian guests, but that the money can also help other people at risk of homelessness. So I'd be interested to know how much of that money can be used to help other people at risk of homelessness, especially as further on in the paragraph, it indicates that the amount of money you get will depend on how many Ukrainians we've got here. So there's all that. So there's one more question I wanted to ask, but maybe I can come back in a moment with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
So what I'd like to do with that is first of all to say that is the information as we have received it. However, I'm going to hand over to Lauren because it's an interesting position as you've highlighted.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Unfortunately, the government haven't provided us with any more information as yet. Obviously, you've seen that that's been announced in the public domain, the availability of that funding, and it builds into why the per person grant funding has been reduced for year 2 to release that extra 150 million dedicated to the reduction of homelessness. So far, we don't know how it's going to be allocated, so the upper tier versus lower tier housing authorities, and we don't know whether every local authority will be in scope or not. I've attended regional meetings very recently in the last 7 days, and the government haven't made those decisions as yet. And we've been advised not to expect that information in the next few weeks. It's more likely to be the next few months. So it's unfortunately a watch this space. You've highlighted complexities that are difficult for us to manage because it makes longer term planning around use of the funding to be able to maximise the funding to its fullest very difficult, but that's the current position we're in.
Okay, thank you. Did you say you have another
Thank
question?
you. Yeah. Yes, if I may, Chairman. A lot of the papers that we're dealing with regard to refugees are to do with Ukrainians. And we mention the Afghans, but we really don't mention them very much. And we've got this big scheme to accommodate the Ukrainians, but does anybody take the Afghans into their family houses? Has there been any drive or request to do so? And if not, do we know why not? Thank you.
So no, there hasn't been a request. What there has been a request to every housing authority in the country to identify appropriate housing. So taking one step back, when Syrian refugees first came into the country, there was a similar request to all housing authorities to identify opportunities where there might be suitable housing. That was quite successful. There were small numbers of Syrian refugees then who went into independent housing and settled in those communities. That was replicated with the Afghan scheme, and families are starting to settle in housing that is identified. The uniqueness of the Ukraine scheme, I think, was that it happened so suddenly, and there were so many people who were desperate to get out of the country that the UK, like many other nationalities, opened up their doors through a family settlement scheme. To my knowledge, that hasn't been done with anything else in the recent past in the country. Obviously, we're at that transition point now where many of our Ukraine families either have already found independent accommodation or are looking for that going forward. So the intention always was that the sponsorship would be an immediate place of safety to allow people to find their feet and then find their way into housing. But no, the Afghan situation has never been about people offering their own home. It's always been through the offer of independent accommodation.
Thank you ever so much.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Thanks. I just wanted to come back to Councillor Brockway. I know there's quite a substantial Afghan community in Lincoln, I'm told, and this was prior to last September, but at that point there were around 250 families, because an awful lot live in the top half of the city near me, Monks Road area, that kind of area. So there's an existing, quite a substantial Afghan community, but I don't know how that changed from the business from last September. They approached me for help, and I took that hire to Westminster, colleagues there, but I think the people that got out were very lucky if they did. It was pretty awful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Stokes.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would like to praise the work that the team are doing, because the government are certainly not making this very easy for you. But with regards to the Afghan resettlement, we've got on page 67, it does say that the relevant district council can claim funding for up to 3 years. With regards to the Afghans, it does say that all school-aged children resident at the bridging hotels have been offered school places. So I'm just wondering if some of that funding has found its way to the county council as well to cover those school places. Thank you.
Lauren, I'll let you pick that one up.
Yeah, so there's separate funding for education provision for the Afghan schemes, similar to the Ukraine scheme. There's a separate funding stream linked in with DFE.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is about the hotel use, because this seems to have been creating a lot of publicity all over the place, really. And it does say on page 71 that partnership organisations liaise with Serco about all of this. And what I would really like to know is, what does that actually mean? Are we given notice that this is going to happen? How much notice are we given? Are we able to make any preparations in the area before it happens? I just really wanted a bit more factual information rather than relying on perhaps what you see in the media all the time. Thank you.
So the original intention from central government was that Serco, who is the operator, should be talking to local authorities in advance of standing up hotels. In practice, that has been really hit and miss. There have been occasions where we have been called into a conversation, perhaps on a Friday, to be told that people would be arriving on Monday, and then finding that people had arrived over the weekend. There have also been situations where we've arrived to work on a Monday morning to find that people have arrived overnight without our being aware that that hotel was being stood up. You'll remember in particular, there was a large drive not so long ago to move people out of Manston in Kent in terms of a centre, and I think that was a good example of where decisions were made and people were moved very quickly without necessarily the local areas being able to take a lead on that. Having said that, through the council-wide partnership, as soon as any of the partners is alerted to the fact that there may be a hotel stood up, the district council takes the lead and convenes a partner meeting. That generally involves Lauren or one of our colleagues, usually involves fire and rescue, environmental health, and the public protection team in public health. We don't have a right of veto, but what we do have is statutory duties to protect the public and to protect both the workforce and the individuals who are coming into those places. So as soon as we know that a hotel is being stood up, we will usually do a joint three-way site inspection. Interesting listening to your previous conversation about the work that Mark does and trading standards, but to look at very similar things. Are the premises safe? Who's going in there? Is it clean? Are there any food hygiene issues that could cause illness? Is it fire safe, etc.? So we've got a very well rehearsed routine now of making sure that we can, at least as soon as we know, go and do that piece of assurance work. What we have found is that where we have then flagged issues back to Serco, they have generally picked those up quite quickly with the hotel management and the hotel staff. Again, interestingly, some of the conversation from your previous report in terms of providing information in different languages, whether that's information about fire escapes or whatever that might be, all of those things are things that we've looked into and tried to make possible in terms of those statutory duties. There has recently been a mandate from Robert Jenrick to Serco to insist that local authorities are given greater notice. We haven't had that put to the test on the basis that there have been no new hotels stood up in Lincolnshire since that mandate was issued by Robert Jenrick. But yes, it can be a very fluid situation. It can be a situation that happens very quickly. But yeah, through the work that we've done, we have had a really productive way forward of making sure that those individuals are as safe as possible, and the wider community and the staff of those facilities.
Thank you. Could I just come back? You mentioned you did the inspection, obviously, when the hotel is stood up. These people are desperate, of course, and we would hate to think that they could be taken advantage of. So do you go back and do another inspection for the hotels that have been running for a while to make sure that people are getting the right food and proper accommodation? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, but and particularly where there have been items that we have asked them to address, we go back and make sure that those items have been actioned. We don't have any authority beyond, well, the authority we have is through our statutory duty. So yes, we take that forward. We don't have a right to then close that hotel down unless there is something so shocking that it wouldn't meet that statutory duty test. So it's very much about influencing and partnership. But yes, we do follow up those actions.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you. Samantha, you previously informed this committee that in April 2022, there have been, I think it was 279 hosts identified in Lincolnshire for Ukraine refugees. I might have missed it in the report, but could you update us on the current picture, please?
Lauren, I think that's your area again as well.
Yeah, so there's around 400 plus. I'd have to dig out the exact figure because you can appreciate that figure changes quite frequently. But we've still got around 800 Ukrainian guests staying with their hosts around the county. Obviously, different hosts have different guest groups. Some have large multi-generational families staying in their homes versus others have taken a single adult. But yeah, it's around the 400 mark, and we're still communicating with our guests and hosts on a bi-weekly basis via our e-newsletter. We've had a recent employment survey open, trying to capture some information from our Ukrainian guests about how they're finding access to employment, and working closely with the DWP to address some of those barriers that come out of that survey that we're going to look at over the next few weeks.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Dunny.
I have a few questions. My first one is, can you tell us how many nationalities which is combined in these refugees schemes? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it differs. So it's at a contingency site, a contingency hotel. You know, one hotel may have 4 or 5 nationalities staying versus others will have upwards of 11. A recent piece of translation work that I did required me to translate a document into 11 different languages. So that gives you a little bit of information about how many could be in a hotel. In terms of the schemes, obviously, it's dictated by the country of origin that's applicable to the scheme, but I think that question probably relates most to the contingency hotels, which it can be, like I said, anything from 4 or 5 up to 11.
If I may come back, Mr. Chairman, another question, which is, I think it was raised last week, I think on the news, that I think the government, they need more landlords to come forward because there is a lack of spaces now for these refugees. Is that right?
So the position is that the government contracts with Serco, and Serco has a contract to go out and find accommodation, and that is to accommodate asylum seekers. Predominantly. So the position is that Serco are looking, as you would have seen, as you rightly say from the news, looking for accommodation that is deemed suitable with the aim of taking those folks who are currently in hotels out of hotel provision. So Serco are casting their net quite widely. They're looking for detached houses. They're looking for potentially unused student accommodation and a range of other appropriate accommodation, but not hotel-based. So yes, that is correct. That's the direction of travel for central government with the aim of emptying the hotels.
Thank you. And my last, it's a question probably, but you can take it as a question if you wish to answer it, is I have heard that there were some complaints. The first complaints, they were from, I think, what I seen, it was an Afghan family who lived in a hotel, I think, for over a year. And when they talk to two young ladies, they say we feel like we're in prison because we need to go to a house that will be much better for our well-being. That's the first one. Second one was from an Ukrainian family. They didn't want their kids to go to a school, primary school, because there is so many colors in that school. So they were shocked. They didn't want to send their kids there. How do you deal with these kind of situations?
That's really interesting. I mean, in terms of your first example, we wouldn't necessarily know about any of those Ukrainian complaints. The Afghan complaints, they would be dealt with by Serco, with the management and the hotel staff. So that's very interesting to hear. It's not something that would come across our radar particularly. In terms of the Ukrainian families, they are accessing school places through the normal route. They apply through the normal school applications process in the same way as they would with anybody else, and they are offered school places based on availability of places close to where they live. Clearly, people will have views on whether they feel that's appropriate or not, but just to be really clear, the Ukrainian families apply through the same process as anybody else does.
If I may come back, thank you very much for the answer, but it was on the TV, it was broadcast on the news on the TV, both issues. So it was real. The only thing, if I may touch on something else, okay, Mr. Chairman, which is when you look at, the report here is very good because it's so many, so many information, and it's good. Even when you talk to your constituent, you can reply to them and give them the right figures, because some people didn't know that we have 5 hotels in East Lindsey, which is basically accommodating single men. And I wonder if I may, it's not I wonder, I'm shocked because our government spending over 8 billion a year on accommodating refugees, and it's a lot of money while we are struggling in other departments. And I don't see why, if there is young male staying in the hotels, not to push them to work where it's needed, or probably just make a sort of process where you can find out what do. You are a mechanic, come here. You are probably a farmer, come here. You are a barber, and then we can distribute them on the country, and they can work, and at least they can provide for themselves, pay taxes, instead of waiting for over a year for their status or their applications to be, processed. And there's a lot of people that are waiting even for their visas, and it's just a kind of if I may say, a catastrophic situation we're having in this country. And it doesn't make our residents and the resident citizens of this country happy at all, because we struggle on finance on certain departments, and however, we're spending money on the other side, which is as a person myself, I don't know what's wrong. I'm not going to criticize our government, but something is not right there. As I say, 8 billion to spend here, and then we're going to have the firefighters soon. They are going to have their strike as well. So it is quite a case that we have. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak.
Okay, you're welcome. Do you wish to come back on those comments, Samantha and Lauren?
I won't come back on those comments specifically, because obviously that's in reference to national policy, but I will just come back on the request for the latest Ukraine hosting numbers. I've dug those out for you, and as of the beginning of this month, we've still got 360 host families around Lincolnshire.
Okay, thank you for that.
Nothing further from me, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
No further comments? Just one place I come across on my travels here sometimes, that's Bicker Bars Roundabout. I'm not sure, excuse my ignorance, I don't know what type of people are in there, but it just seems so far removed from facilities and whatever. And are these people, if they're supported by means of transport, or are they educated in a certain way, what to do and how to get about and whatever? Bit of a basic question, but I'd just be interested.
Yeah, again, the location of hotels is not something that we have any say over, and there are pros and cons for being in a populated area and not being in a populated area. There is a national organisation that is commissioned by central government called Migrant Help, and those coming into the country through asylum schemes are given access to be able to talk to Migrant Help to help them with a whole raft of different issues. In terms of transport, I do believe that in that particular instance, the hotelier has commissioned some transport to enable people to get, for example, to GP appointments, to get into the nearest towns, etc. Those arrangements are brokered by Serco with the hotelier involved and are part of the contract that is then put in place with that individual. But yeah, absolutely recognise the point that you're making. Lincolnshire is a large rural county, and certainly the way that the schemes have worked at the moment hasn't been ideal in either sense, either in terms of having lots of hotels grouped together in Skegness where it is very visible and very accessible, but equally, as you say, that particular hotel is a little bit in the middle of nowhere. So quite difficult for people to then sort of find outlet for their time, I guess, given that, as we've just said, asylum seekers are not permitted to work.
And good question about the adult learning elements. That's something that I specifically dug into with Serco colleagues as part of the partnership meetings, and I understand that that's part of their contract. So residents are offered, I don't know the extent of the provision, but are offered access to English lessons.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know it's not within our remit, but I do tend to agree with Councillor Danny about the situation with asylum seekers not being permitted to work, because it is, as I say, it's out of our hands. But we're in a rural county where we're crying out for workers, and I just think pressure should be put on the necessary authorities to at least allow temporary work permits for people, because it must be so depressing being stuck in a hotel day after day, waiting with this thing over you about whether you're going to be accepted or not. And I can't understand the logic behind it myself. I mean, I'm sure people much more educated than me will have 101 reasons why it's like it is, but it just doesn't seem to make any sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that, Samantha?
I'd only come back to say that I think it's interesting when you look at other countries' approaches, because countries deal with it differently, and I think some other countries' approach is different in terms of allowing temporary work visas and the ability for those seeking asylum to work straight away. But obviously, our government haven't taken that decision, and I don't think any of the comments that have been made in the meeting today are different to what a lot of national organisations are sharing in terms of that view.
And I think just to add to that, you may have seen, I think it was last Thursday, Councillor Bradwell did a short interview on Look North, and that particular piece profiled 3 Iranian Christians who are staying in the Skegness area. They are allowed to do some volunteering, and in that particular instance, they had taken up that opportunity working with the local church. And I think for the reasons that you said, very much valued that in terms of social connection and their mental and physical well-being.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, Samantha's just picked up on that, the fact that a lot of the asylum seekers in Skegness, quite a number are actually volunteering. Samantha picked on the specific example of the group of Christian men who are working one of the faith groups there. But I think you'll find across our district, quite a number are volunteering. But just while I'm speaking, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just wanted to thank Samantha and Lauren for what they're doing. I think Sem said that this was a good example of county-wide partnership working, and it really is. It's a fabulous example if we think about the number of partnerships that are involved here, whether it from district or county level, whether it be public health, whether it be the police, whether it be fire and rescue, whether it be housing teams. They've all stepped up with no notice really whatsoever. And these are very vulnerable people. They don't want to be here, I'm sure. They want to remain in their home countries if they were allowed to do so. So let's thank our various teams that really have stepped up and are working in such great partnership, working together.
Thank you. Any comments on that, Samantha and Lauren?
Only just to say, I think actually certainly Lauren and I, we could not do this work, and we could not give you assurance around the security of this work without all of those partners. And Councillor Gray's mentioned some of those internal partners. Almost every part of the County Council has had an involvement at some point in these schemes. But yeah, the partnership working, and it is recognised across the East Midlands and beyond that we have a very robust way of working in Lincolnshire. And I think, it's credit to every agency that we have picked up this and made it work. And I think as we've perhaps outlined some of the challenges and changes with the piece of work, it can be very fast moving, but absolute credit to everybody out there who is supporting this.
Yeah, I would explicitly reference our health colleagues in that as well, who've had to step up in various different ways to ensure appropriate access to healthcare for all of these various individuals, and they're very firmly around the table and working really closely with us as part of those partnerships.
Okay, thank you. I can see no further questions. I'll say that hesitantly. No further questions. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I'm going to move that we endorse the report, that we are satisfied with the developments in Lincolnshire, given that we are a county with less experience to resettlement in comparison to some areas nationally, and that we have received assurance on having robust governance and operational arrangements in place to respond to requirements. I also ask that feedback and comments from the debate today are taken under consideration by relevant officers and portfolio holders. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you. That is agreed. So thank you for your input on that, and thank you to Lauren and Samantha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now move on to item 9, which is the Public Protection and Communities Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 75 to 78 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara, our Scrutiny Officer, and the actions for the committee today is we're invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chiara Hatianu, Scrutiny Officer designated for this committee. The committee's work programme is a living document and a standing agenda item that allows members to cast a view of what is coming up in terms of topics to be discussed in future meetings, and also to make requests and suggestions of particular topics to be reviewed for future inclusion to the work programme, provided that these continue to add value to the works of the Council and partners, and ensuring that scrutiny activities focused where it can be of greatest benefit. So, taking your gaze to the next meeting, which is scheduled for the 21st of March 2023, we're due to receive our quarterly report for Q3 on service level performance reporting against the success framework for 2022-2023, a report on Prevent, which is an annual position report, and an item on substance misuse as previously requested by members. Following today's discussion, the two topics that emerged and have been captured for inclusion, either in a form of a report to be brought back or as a briefing report to be shared in response to comments raised in discussion, are A, citizens' advice, negotiations, procurement process and commissioning arrangements, and B, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service, Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Staff Survey, Feedback and Key Messages. Should members wish to see any other topics included in the work programme, please raise these now or do contact me offline for a discussion. In the next meeting, the committee will receive the work programme that is currently being developed and agreed for the rest of the year and into 2024. Topics will include the standing quarterly and annual reports, items found under the list entitled To Be Programmed, which is on page 77 of your agenda pack, and a series of items on various strands of the works of Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, as previously requested by members of this committee. An example is that in the May agenda we will receive an item on preventing women and girls from entering the criminal justice strategy, as previously requested, following from the presentation we received from Zoe Walters, Community Safety Strategy Coordinator, responsible for reducing offending, which was brought in the last meeting around work undertaking to reduce reoffending. And this concludes my update to you. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key, followed by Councillor Lee.
Oh, well, it may be the same thing, but I was just checking. The citizens' advice item, will that be possible at the next meeting in March?
Thank you, Councillor Key. I will have to liaise with officers to make sure that this can be featured in the next agenda, but again, taking into consideration maintaining a balance of items to be considered, but also making sure that this doesn't crush people's schedules as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, even if it was a progress report, because I think you use those words, progress report, because there's been some concerns about that today, and I think it would be useful to tackle it and get it sorted sooner rather than later. Thank you.
I will emphasise on that. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Lee.
I'd like to add my weight to that as well, please. We've got a report from Citizens Advice in May, and we've also got the annual budget before that. And I think it's really important that we clarify this. And I think as members of this committee, if we decide that's what we want to prioritise, then we should have at least something at the future meeting as soon as possible, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Happy to take those comments back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to have an update probably on the CCTV around Lincolnshire.
In what particular context? Councillor
Well,
Dunny?
just to know the benefit of having the CCTV and preventing crime, basically. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, if we look into that one for us, yeah. Thank you. Okay, again, no further questions. So, just see where I've got to now. Okay, so thank you for your questions and comments. I'm going to move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 75 to 78 and the additional items highlighted in the Scrutiny Officer's further update and from today's discussion. Can you raise your hand if you agree? Thank you, that's all agreed. So thank you, members, for that, and thank you, Chiara, for your presentation. We now close this part of the meeting and now sit as the Crime and Disorder Committee, which is item 10 on the agenda. It's the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership. This item is on pages 79 to 84 of the agenda pack. The report provides the committee with an update on the strategic activity of the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership over the past year. In line with previous reports received by Zoe Walters, Partnership Coordinator, this report is intended to be of high level, noting that we will in future receive separate reports from the Partnership's priority areas, including antisocial behaviour, reducing offending, crime and disorder, and substance misuse. The actions for us today is that we're invited to consider and comment on the contents of this report and endorse the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership Plan to reduce crime, disorder and antisocial behaviour in our county of Lincolnshire. The report will be presented by Claire Seaborn, who is the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership Business Manager, who's in the chamber today. So, patiently waiting, over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I've just crept over. So thank you for that introduction. As Councillor said, this is intended to be a very high-level strategic update reporting on the strategic board's progress in terms of compliance with the statutory duties and how we've enabled an environment to facilitate them partners to come together and comply with those duties. So by way of background and refresh for the committee, the SLP is the single strategic multi-agency forum for partners and performs as the informally merged partnership, community safety partnership, and known in Lincolnshire as the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership. We come together to work towards a number of statutory duties, which are bullet pointed in the paper, so I won't read those out to you. But move swiftly on to talk about the strategic assessment, which is one of our statutory duties, and the last assessment, which was produced in 2021. We think in an unprecedented approach, we have found no evidence of the same approach being applied elsewhere in the country. We produced a tri-board product, so it served not only the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership, but also the Safeguarding Adults Board and Safeguarding Children's Partnership. So all three of those boards have used the information contained in the report to inform their strategy development going forward. So from the SLP's perspective, the report was presented to members and we considered a number of questions, which again I've highlighted in the report. And I think really our emphasis was around ensuring that we did comply with the requirements of the Crime and Disorder Act. And I think that is evidenced in the way that we kind of structured our strategy under each of our areas of responsibility, which has already been touched on, covers antisocial behaviour, crime and disorder, reducing reoffending and substance misuse. So I won't go through each of the strategy areas as they are contained within the report, but I just wanted to highlight that we do have a core priority group for each of those, and that's a multi-agency representation and is effectively our delivery arm of the SLP. Those groups have now drawn up a delivery plan to demonstrate how we will comply and deliver against each of the statutory areas that have been set by the Strategy Board, and progress of that is reported back to the Strategy Board on a quarterly basis. What I did want to bring to the committee's attention, as of today, the SLP does have a new statutory duty in respect of serious violence. The duty does come with a requirement to complete a strategic assessment and strategy development, and identifies, as listed in the paper, the partners that are required to attend the partnership. I'm pleased to say that in Lincolnshire we're very much ahead of the game. In anticipation of the new duty coming in, we have already completed a needs assessment. We've created a core priority group as that delivery arm, and they have been meeting since August, and we've already got a draft strategy being worked on. So can just clarify that whilst the duty has come into force today, we do have a year to put the arrangements in place, and the strategy is required to be published 31st of January next year. So because we've already got that work well underway, we will be well ahead on producing that strategy before January of next year. Moving down to domestic homicide reviews, again just to make the committee aware that the SLP has delegated production of domestic homicide reviews to the Domestic Abuse Partnership following its introduction a year or so ago. However, given that the statutory duty remains with the SLP, we have now agreed a biannual assurance report to come back from the Domestic Abuse Partnership to the SLP Strategic Board. This will include a brief overview of statutory duties are being met, an update on any identified themes and trends and associated response, progress towards completion of action plans and assurances around finance. The following sections, so around dashboard, finance and communication, is really kind of a summary for the committee's information around the activity of the Strategic Board over the last 12 months and progress that we have made. Which brings us to support from Lincolnshire County Council. So I've listed there the contribution made to the partnership by the LCC as one of the statutory members of the partnership. And then in conclusion, hopefully as I've demonstrated within the report, the SLP has invested heavily over the last year to ensure that all the conditions are in place to ensure that the partnership is able to perform effectively against its statutory duties for the benefit of residents and those visiting Lincolnshire. Happy to take any questions or comments.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Brockway.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you. My question's on page 83 about the domestic homicide reviews. I noticed that you have delegated that to a partner group. I can't see what to the Lincolnshire Domestic Abuse Partnership, which is absolutely fine. But should a homicide take place, would they then contact you, and would you then be part of any following investigation? It wouldn't wait until the biannual report, would it?
No, absolutely no. There's a full process in place, and I don't know whether Martin wants to kind of comment on that as the chair of the Domestic Abuse Programme Board as well. But yeah, we certainly wouldn't wait. The paper I'm referring to here is very much that assurance that the Domestic Abuse Partnership is learning from lessons learned, progressing in the action plans and things, not actually in respect of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. We're in a fortunate position that I both chair the SLP group and also the Lincolnshire Domestic Abuse Partnership as well. So I have kind of statutory control over both of those as the chair, which is quite nice. So yeah, there's no delay in terms of our review processing or information sharing. It's purely to say that we abdicate our responsibility over to the Domestic Abuse Partnership. Now they've been created in law as a result of the DA bill, because actually it sits better in there, and probably in the future it might in legislation get moved over to those as their statutory duty in any coming review of the bill. because we didn't have a Lincolnshire Domestic Abuse Partnership pre the Domestic Abuse Bill, that's why it came into the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership as a statutory duty for us to hold. So we still hold it, but actually it's better placed where it is. But it doesn't affect any of the communication or the notification or the investigation into lessons learned.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Dunny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just, it's a very good report, and as we say, it's good to read, and you start understanding things. I'm just interested. I think I will tell you which page is that. 81, which is we go to reducing reoffending. I mean, from my knowledge, because when you are around the public, you can see a lot of people there. They commit this antisocial behavior, for example, and when you talk to them and you tell them probably you shouldn't do that, their response is they don't care. And if, for example, you refer it to the police sometimes, and I'm sorry to say that, it happens where the answer was where we have other things to do, but the offense was committed in front of them. And I will tell you where. It was just cycling in groups of like 10, and they're just disturbing, by the White Bargate, the pressing in Boston. And when you talk to the police and you found this kind of reaction or answers, you say, what will happen? Then you go to the law, and there is, I think, a fixed penalty of £50 if you cycle on pedestrian paths. And then nobody gets, penalized for that. And then, you have the questions from the public, which has become like a wave of, I think, a storm. And you have to answer, and then you have to be between the police and the public, and you assure everybody that things are done. The police are, working probably tight. They're doing their best. So where we stand with these things, because if we're going to stop people reoffending, we have to establish the law first and make people accountable for what they're doing and if they're crossing the line of the law. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dannett. A really difficult question to answer, ironically, because it's around kind of threat, risk and harm and where our resources best fit the danger that comes into our communities, and what our Joint Strategic Needs Assessment said and talks about and looked at where our most risk sat within reoffending. Where Lincolnshire specifically had an issue where we wanted to identify was in female offenders as a cohort, and also offenders who were in the transition years of 18 to 25. So they were the two ones that we focused in reducing reoffending aspect of our targeted work. I think what Councillor Danny represents is there's a difference between having to try and reduce everybody's reoffending than actually being targeted and specific with the finances and the resources that we have. We are one of the least funded forces, or the least funded forces in the country, and we have to be proportionate with how we allocate and present our resources, both within the force and also within partnerships. And I do take your point that it's very, very hard and very, very challenging to see something that you consider to be an offence, and it is an offence. Cycling on a pathway is an offence, and can be given a fixed penalty. But is that proportionate use of time to be able to enforce that if actually they're just, there is guidance, advice that could be given. And it's about empowering your local community to kind of provide that advice to them, to say, look, do you realise that 10 people cycling on a pathway is one going to cause some sort of distress to some of the residents walking on it? So I think there's an educational programme that can be presented, but in terms of where we're trying to look at as an SLP, we've got to think about where our most threat and risk and harm is, and actually make sure we target those resources to make sure we're reducing the offending in those places.
Councillor Key. Councillor
Can
Key.
you come back? Thank you very much for the answer. I really sympathise with your force, because it is a reality. We are short of everything. I think as a councillors or county councillors or this committee, we should put some pressure on our MPs to probably lobby for more money to our area, especially with the police. It's a big area, and it's a lot of things to be done. And if we're looking at the future and increase of population, and we talk, through the trading standards, the shops are opening, we have all of these things, and the police has to carry all this burden. I think we should probably, as I say, put a pressure on our MPs to lobby for more money and more police for our area, so we can support the safety of the residents of Lincolnshire. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I believe Martin may know better than this, but I believe everything that can possibly be done is being done, and not just with MPs and the Police and Crime Commissioner and everyone possible. Perhaps you could enlarge on that, Martin.
Yeah, can, Mr. Chairman. You're exactly right. The Chief Constable has meetings with the MPs throughout the county and also with the PCC, Mark Jones, and they regularly write into government. There is due to be a funding formula review, so we are within central government. The dates of that's not yet been published, but we are hopeful that it will now. We've kind of come out of government thinking about pandemics and other things that have been on their mind, that we actually get into looking at reviewing the funding formula that forces have. But yeah, we've certainly made our case very strongly in the county.
And I think it's notable because I think Lincolnshire is at the bottom of the graph. I think I'm right in saying so. It's quite noticeable where we are. Sure, yeah. Councillor Key.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we might be getting slightly off the point, but since we're talking about policing, I was at a parish council meeting last night. There's a great deal of concern about the proposals on the cuts to PCSOs from 91 to 50, I think. And I just think that when we're talking about these strategic priorities, for an area like mine, we rely on PCSOs to be the visible presence of the police. And I too have great concerns about this proposal. Thank you.
Okay, we are going off track a little bit, but go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I say, recognising it is a topical issue that's currently obviously within the paper and the decisions that the forces are going to have to make. And I would recommend that if any councillors have got any views, that they are pushed back through the relevant channels in terms of the Police Crime Commissioner and the PCPB, which is their open forum to be able to feed that back, and then that can come into the force in the appropriate way. I don't think it's right for me to comment within this committee in relation to that.
I agree. Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say from my side of the chamber as well that the cuts to PCSOs, it really, really worries me. With some of the crime that we see, you've got to have the staff to deal with it, and if you haven't got them, but sadly, right across public services, things are underfunded, and that's the fact of life, isn't it? Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Sneath.
Yes, just joining in on that actually, certainly work in South Holland, the PCSOs perform a really sterling job for us, and their loss and the lack of numbers is going to really affect us. They're pretty much the only police presence that we see on the whole, coming to parish councils, walking around estates, whatever. And I certainly thank you for that, Martin. I shall be writing in because I'm really concerned about this, and I'd rather they were cutting a few office staff, frankly, than the actual visible face of the policing community. So.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I
just 1 moment before we finish that one. I agree there with Councillor Sneath. Coming from the South Holland, we can't speak for other districts, but certainly for the PCOs wasn't there, we wouldn't see any at all. That's the vision we have. Councillor Key.
I was just going to add that we're sitting as the Crime and Disorder Partnership, and I think it's entirely appropriate that we make that comment as a committee, because I would imagine we all agree with it. I certainly do in my area, because we totally rely on PCSOs. I'm not saying the officers don't do a sterling job, it's just that it's a huge county, they can't be everywhere at once, and I just think they provide really good community support, and I was flabbergasted when I heard the report. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, quite appropriate, I agree, Councillor Key, but we'll just got to be careful we don't go too off-piste at times. But where was it, Councillor Lee?
I just wanted to say, yes, I agree, we should write and make that comment as a committee, and I would second that.
Okay. That all noted. Thank you. Did I have anybody else over there? No. Councillor Gray, sorry.
And on the same subject, they no longer attend parish council meetings. I have over 50 parish council meetings with both hats on I wear. You never see a PCSO or a police officer now. The clerks ask for reports, you don't get reports. And so it's me who's asked those questions that I have to try and find out to come back to tell my parish councillors, because the police aren't providing any reports or any update. They say, oh, we've sent our newsletter, which is just a very, very generic newsletter, so everything's very happy and shiny, and it's not happy and shiny. So we are now becoming the face of the police at our parish council meetings. Surely that's not our remit.
I know Councillor Sneath mentioned him attending parish council meetings, but it is a bit of a rarity, as you know. Yeah, sure. Okay, I had a question or two here, if I can find it. Back to you, Claire. In last year's annual report, there was an inquiry around community trigger process. Can you inform us how many times it has been requested in the past 12 months, if that's possible?
No, I wouldn't specifically be able to answer that question, but I can take that away and find that out.
If you could, yeah.
Come back. What I would just say is that the community trigger process has undertaken a thorough review, and there is a new process being established. So it might be helpful if I share that information with the committee as a briefing paper update alongside them figures.
That would be good. Martin, did you want to comment on that?
I actually think it's scheduled in the proposed list that Chiara went through in terms of the ASB trigger. I think it's in the list to be presented to the committee.
Okay, that's noted then, Chiara, yeah. Okay. And on page 25, you mentioned that a violence reduction strategic needs assessment was undertaken in line with the added duty to tackle serious violence. When are we likely to have outcomes of these shared with members, please?
Yeah, so we'll be looking to bring that into the committee, as Chiara said, if we're planning next year's kind of schedule in terms of the committee. Serious violence will be one of those that will be shared with members.
And that'll be next year, yeah, Martin, yeah, okay, thank you. Have we any further questions? No. Okay, so thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of the item. I'm going to move that we endorse the report and record our satisfaction on the activities undertaken that demonstrates the efforts of the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership to discharge its statutory duties, and I request that our feedback and comments from the debate to be taken under consideration by SLP officers and portfolio holders. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Thank you, that's all agreed. And thank you, Martin and Claire. One moment.
Can I just check? We're sending a letter to Mark Jones about the PCSOs. Thank you.
Sure, I should have reiterated that, I guess, but yeah, that has been encapsulated now. Thank you for that. Okay, so that now concludes the business of the meeting. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. You may now leave the council chamber. Thank you.